Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network every Thursday at 1 p.m. And you can also find me on theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. So today we have Justin coming in from the Bronx, New York, my place, the Socialist Republic of New York. Um, he's the creator of libertyhangout.org, which is his website and blog. He has also got a YouTube channel, the Liberty Hangout, or Liberty Hangout, and also a Facebook page, Liberty Hangout. And his Twitter is at Liberty Hangout. So he likes to keep it consistent, makes it easy for people to follow. No curveballs. He's also got a kind of satirical Facebook page called Bernie Stalin 2016. So be sure to give him some likes because we all need more likes, right? So Justin, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on, Daniil. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah. So I found your Liberty Hangout YouTube channel, and I saw your videos with the I don't know what you call it. They're like campaign like trailers, satire, something like that, right?
It all started with on Twitter when my friends and we were jokingly calling Marco Rubio a communist.
Uh-huh.
And so I decided, you know what? Let me make this guy a little promo video,
Right.
make him appear like this hardcore communist. And so I made this first video. It all started with Marco Rubio, and I had him walking out with fire in the background, and you had the hammer and sickle.
Right.
And then from there, just kind of progressed to all the other Republican candidates. I ended up doing a Scott Walker one. I just try to make these as egregious as possible. And that all led up to my climax of making the Bernie Sanders one, where I compared him to Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. And, I like having a lot of fun with them.
Yeah, and then you did one for, I guess, for voluntarism, right? Or just your Liberty Hangout promo, right?
Yes, the Liberty Hangout promo, that was because when I first founded the website, I founded it back in February of this year.
Yeah.
And I founded it not really with much of an intention behind it. I'd always been into politics, and my reasoning for founding the website, it was originally called YoungJeffersonians.com. And so that was when I was a minarchist libertarian, and I was looking to steer away from words that may have had negative connotations. And so I decided to model myself after Jefferson and go with YoungJeffersonians.com. And my main reasoning for making the site was I liked talking about politics, but I know that people tend to steer away from the people who just make long rants on Facebook. So I kind of wanted to have a more professional look to present my arguments. And so it started with YoungJeffersonians.com. And from there, I found a few writers on Twitter, and I went to a Young Americans for Freedom conference up in New Hampshire, and that's where I met my friend James. He is our co-founder. And so after much thought and deliberation, I became a voluntarist, and that's when I decided to cut the ties with any politicians. And even though I greatly revere Jefferson for what he did in founding the United States of America, I just wanted to have a title that was more neutral and welcoming and warm. And so we decided to agree upon the name Liberty Hangout, where it's very inviting. It's a movement. We want more people to join this conversation. And so it has been called, we've had the website called libertyhangout.org since I think early May now. And that's when we really took off, was when we had that name change.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned the founding of the website. So before that, like what led you down the path of interested in politics, and especially liberty and voluntarism?
I grew up in a very conservative household, and so growing up I had a great passion for the military. That was really my goal. I wanted to go to college and join Army ROTC. And so because I was a conservative, I really had that main guiding principle of freedom. At the time I may not have truly known what freedom was, but just having that guiding principle there is enough to keep an open mind. And so as a conservative, I would say that I was mildly interested in politics up until after the 2012 election. Once Obama was reelected, that's when I dropped Army ROTC, because I knew that as a soldier, I would have no say in what I do. I would virtually be enslaved by the federal government to just carry out its will. And so it was at that point that I really just started questioning the whole paradigm of the government. And then I would say I was still neoconservative up until a year ago. And even back then, I was still listening to your Sean Hannity's, your Mark Levin's. I was big into Glenn Beck. And so last year, I really started delving into it because I wanted to be able to adequately debate liberals. And so I just started reading all these conservative books. I read books from Glenn Beck, from Ben Carson, from Alan West, even Dinesh D'Souza, just all these talking heads. And then I decided to, what really began, what really made me start questioning my whole belief system was when I first, I saw an Andrew Napolitano video on YouTube where he was calling Abraham Lincoln this really dirty tyrant, saying he was the worst president ever. And I'm sitting there staring at my computer, questioning this, like, oh my gosh, he's saying this about Lincoln? Really? And then I saw in the comments section someone recommended to pick up the book The Real Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo. And so I immediately ordered it, but I read it with great caution. And the facts in there just blew my mind. Everything, I just realized that everything I was taught about Lincoln was an entire lie, and that he was the father of progressivism and big government. And then from there, I decided to purchase some Judge Napolitano books. And I didn't even know that Judge Napolitano was a libertarian. I just saw him on Fox News. I assumed he was conservative. So I bought a couple of his books. I bought his book, Theodore and Woodrow, in which he talks about the founding of progressivism in mid-U.S. history. And then I also bought his book, The Lies the Government Told You. And I remember in there, most of the points he touched upon were really conservative principles. But then he also talked about the lies in war and the lies in drug prohibition. And I remember seeing those chapters, and I was very, very weary about opening them up. I was like, no, we need to keep the drugs banned. You know, they're bad for society. We need to go bomb the Middle East. There's bad people over there. But then when I was reading it, it just made total sense to me that, you know, if the government has the ability to regulate drugs because it may lead to bad behavior, no, that's very fascist. That's like the government stepping in and saying, like, okay, this let's say, like, all African Americans may commit more crime than other races. So if you're going to lock people up in jail for using specific drugs because they may be more likely to commit crime, that's the equivalent of arresting an entire race of people for the same principle. And that right there just made me realize, like, no, I can't believe in freedom and also believe in this very contradictory belief. And then from there, I read another Judge Napolitano book, his latest one called Suicide Pact, in which he wrote about all the lies that politicians told to be able to drag us into these never-ending wars. He talked about how the Federal Reserve was created to essentially fund these wars, and then in turn, they say that these wars are fought for our freedom, when in reality, here at the home front, isn't it ironic that every time we go to war, we lose more and more freedom? And so from there, that's when I really became libertarian. But nonetheless, I never really questioned the morality of the state. Rather, I just questioned its role. So I was still a staunch Rand Paul supporter. And then it wasn't until I was on spring break in March, and I came across one single Adam Kokesh video in which he was at CPAC in 2013 debating a conservative about the principles of libertarianism. And he was essentially, I watched a video believing that libertarianism was essentially constitutionalism.
Yeah.
You know, that was my real formal understanding of libertarianism from reading those Judge Napolitano books. And so from just watching that Adam Kokesh video where he's challenging the conservative to think about these moral principles, and he's saying how if I have no right to initiate force against you, what right does the state have? And so it was in that moment that I realized, wow, the state is the biggest criminal enterprise in the history of the world. And so a lot of people, I know in my experience from introducing people to voluntarism, a lot of people are turned off to it just for the fact of, well, I don't see that working. But for me, when I was first introduced from Adam Kokesh, that was all relevant to me. All that mattered to me was the moral implications. And as a Christian, I just couldn't find myself supporting something as criminal as the state.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like, we, it's so funny how we discover all of these different milestones and, different stages in our lives. And, you progress from, conservative to, libertarian to voluntarist. and it all is like a natural progression, right? And it all makes sense.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Right? And then you look back and you're like, wow, look how far I've come. And then when you talk to somebody who has not made that progression, they look at you like you have three heads because you're just making sense. You're applying principles consistently, and you can't do that with the government because the government's special. If you say that, like, If I steal from somebody, it's theft. If the government does, call taxation. No, that you're oversimplifying, you're generalizing, you're utopian. It's not like that. The government's special. We need, all these excuses and ad hominems come up. And, no argument whatsoever, no logic whatsoever. It's just all excuses and ad hominems. And isn't that funny?
Yeah, a lot of rebuttals that I get when I drive home the importance of these moral principles here is that people try to take a moral relativist stance. Yet at the same time, you see that obviously if some issues are of value to them, they see these causes as just. So they care for a moral society just as much as we do. The only difference is that we try to rid ourselves of these inconsistencies.
Yeah, yeah, and the funny thing that they call us is many times is like a utopian, right? You're just you're just a dreamer. Yep. You're a utopian. You're unrealistic. And then when you think about it, every form of government is somebody's utopia, right? People they form a state not because they want to be evil against each other, but most people form a state because they think that's going to lead to the best society, right? The problem is people are led by their emotions rather than by logic and principles and reason and evidence. It's like, a politician says minimum wage is going to help the poor, and they're like, what, that makes sense. I want to help the poor. Okay, I'm going to vote for him without actually thinking about, maybe economics plays somewhat of a role in this, in why businesses pay, a certain amount of money. Maybe it's not just a roulette. They're like, what are we going to pay him now? Let's roll the roulette. There's a logic there. There's a consistency, right?
Yeah, this plays into exactly why people on our side of the aisle will call politicians like Bernie Sanders a demagogue, because he's just appealing to people's emotions. He's providing no rational logic whatsoever. Oh, yeah, free college, free healthcare, right, free this, free that. And, never once is the question asked, well, how's it going to be paid for? And it just came out today. Someone actually did the math, and they were able to come to the conclusion that if Bernie Sanders stuck to all of his promises, it would cost as much as the national debt is right now. So he would. So just like I posted this on Facebook earlier. Just like a crack addict needs another fix in order to mask over his problems, Bernie Sanders wants to spend more and more to cover up the fact that the first $18 trillion didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so much, all that socialist mentality is very, and I mean, I guess you can say the same thing about statism in general. It's very, it's like infant mentality. It's like, I don't have it, he has it, I want it. Give it to me, or you take it from him so I can have it. It's very, or like, your parents pay for something and you're like, where did that money come from? I don't know. Just give it, buy it for me. Like there's no understanding of how money was earned. Labor and skills and time. No, nothing. None of that comes. It's all about emotions. And appealing to the reptilian, limbic system of your brain, very archaic mentality. And yeah, you're right, Bernie Sanders. Free college, free healthcare. Steal from the rich, and yeah, it's just inane.
I think that the disappointing thing when it comes to socialists and liberals in general is that they have all these really good. I would say that they're good people at heart. They have these really good principles, and they desire the same things that we do. The difference is that they don't see is that we want it to be done voluntarily. My co-founder James said on our last podcast, he said, voluntarists are socialists. We just desire the means to be voluntary and not through force. And so I actually wrote an article for my website in which I called out Bernie Sanders supporters for being hypocrites, in that they come out condemning capitalism. Oh, it's going to fail. We need the government to redistribute. Yet, if you look at what they were able to achieve, they voluntarily raised $16.4 million all by themselves. That's capitalism right there. And you know what? I went to a website and I found a foundation. I believe it was called Feed My Starving Child. And I'll pull it up real quickly just so I'm specific. The Feed My Starving Child Foundation. And I went on there and I found that just a small donation of 22 cents is enough to purchase a single meal for a starving child. And so I went and did the math, and $16.4 million, that's enough to feed over 68,000 starving children, 3 meals a day for an entire year. And so here are these socialists saying capitalism fails, it won't work. and yet they're able to raise enough money to feed close to 100,000 people food for an entire year.
Well, I think when those people say capitalism fails, a lot of them have a misunderstanding of terms, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you're talking to these people, one of the first things to say is define capitalism. Define taxation, define theft. And so I try to distill these things into their simplest components so that we can all understand this, so people are not swayed by mushy-headed ideas and feelings, but by actual definitions. Like, let's go to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Let's look up what capitalism is, please. Yeah, and I wrote an article like, what is capitalism? Very simple. Like, what is voluntarism? And voluntarism is not in the dictionary, but what is capitalism? And yeah, look, private, ownership of the means of production privately in private hands. That's it. Basically, that's basically what it is. And then I would add to that voluntary transactions between peaceful people. Right, and that would be the difference between a charity or let's say an interaction between an employee and an employer, right? A voluntary interaction, and then theft, right? It's involuntary. That's not capitalism. That's just theft, right? So capitalism always must be voluntary. Therefore, any kind of force or coercion that government would introduce distorts that and perverts that beautiful mechanism. So what we have today, it's not, I like to say, it's not crony capitalism. Oh, actually, it is crony capitalism. I don't like to use that term because it's like saying crony lovemaking. So I use the term corporate fascism. I think that's more.
Absolutely.
It's much clearer. So, because when crony capitalism, it's still capitalism. They just call it capitalism. No, it's just too confusing. So change the term.
You raise a good point there when you talk about how going to the raw definitions really helps the argument. I remember this one person I follow on Twitter once said, like, yeah, of course I hate capitalism. I'm a liberal. And so I responded with a question. I said, capitalism is simply the voluntary transactions, the peaceful and voluntary transactions between consenting individuals. If you don't like that, then what do you prefer?
Right.
And so I never got a reply, but on a fundamental level, yes, that is what capitalism is. And often people do not realize that this quasi-fascist system that we have is not capitalism.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And they also don't realize that we voluntarists also oppose it. The liberals and the socialists, they oppose the corporatism, whatever you want to call it, just as much as we do. The difference is that they believe that giving the state even more power will remove the problems. Yet they don't see that the state is the problem that started it. Right now, I am taking a business and government course as part of my curriculum, and the whole thing is geared towards corporations and what can the state do to step in and promote ethical behavior.
Oh, that's got to be a fun class for you.
And I sit. It's an easy course, but I sit there twitching the whole time. I just want to stand up and give a filibuster.
Yeah, you're like. I know what all the right answers are, but
yeah. Yeah. And so one class I was actually ready to stand up and raise my hand and ask a question about how, hey, this is all about corporations and correcting their behavior so that's ethical. But doesn't this ignore the underlying problem of how did corporations get so large to begin with? So that they can get to this point where they're so powerful that boycotts and all these things aren't even effective to creating ethical behavior. If it weren't for the state ridding of their competition in the first place, there would be no such thing as corporations.
Yeah, I was actually talking about this with my brother just recently because we were talking about Wal-Mart and how everybody hates Walmart, it's unethical, destroys small businesses, kills competition. And the way I look at that, first of all, number one, actually they're performing a valuable service, right? They're offering these products that so many people are not able to offer at such low prices. And correct. The people that really hate it are most of the people who really hate it are those people that make enough money that they can actually choose not to shop there and buy more expensive local stuff because they're like, this is ethical, I'm going to support my local, and that's good. But then the people that can't afford to do that and they're just getting by, just scraping by, they're like, thank God Walmart's there so that I can buy these things and help my family get through the tough times, right? And then the other thing is that so in that sense Walmart's providing a service, but in the other sense Walmart has gotten huge through massive government intervention, right? Subsidies and tax rates and all that. And I I would posit that it would be very difficult in a pure free market for any business to get that enormous because of all the competition that would be required that it encourages. So it's really, when people hate these corporations, like you said, we're against those and the government together. But people tend to think, the governments are always angels. The politicians are just trying to do the right thing. Just got to support them.
A lot of people also falsely make claims about the so-called natural monopolies in pertinent industries such as energy or transportation, even the roads. But, the way I see it is that just look at all this technological innovation right in front of our very eyes. Let's say there were no government. Extracting oil from the earth, yes, that's very expensive and only a select few people are going to do that. But when we look at the alternatives and we see that you can just grow hemp in your backyard and that can be used as an alternative fuel, that right there gives the individual so much power they never had before. And then when it comes to things like transportation too, because when you think transportation, you're going to think of all these mass transportations, you're going to think of airline industries, you're going to think of trains, you're going to think of cars. But like I said, with technology, we look at all these cell phones and everything. What if one day we all have Adam Kokesh says, what if one day we're all going to have little taxi drones that just beam us into some little cage and fly us off somewhere? It's going to give so much power to the individual like never before. And that because of all the increased competition, everything's going to cost so little.
Yeah. To me, it's Bastiat's seen versus the unseen. We see, cars, people think that cars have advanced, but really cars in the past, 100 years, 110 years, 20 years, they haven't really advanced much. It's pretty slow. And just recently, the electric cars come out, and but really, through all of these, regulations and bureaucracy that they have to jump through to make each car, saleable. Imagine if that wasn't necessary, if that wasn't the case, they didn't have to waste all that. All those resources satisfying bureaucrats, where would we be today, right? All the potential has been destroyed trying to satisfy bureaucrats, right? And so that's the unseen potential that people don't realize that has been destroyed. Maybe we have flying cars, you're right. Maybe we'll have teleportation. Who knows? But all that has been destroyed because of, parasites that think that it's their moral obligation to control people who are actually smarter and more creative than they are.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct there. And it's, in addition to what you just said, a lot of people today, they drive home the point of we need green, efficient energy, protect the environment. Well, if you had a free market and free competition, you would have green energy. You would be protecting the environment, and private landowners would have an incentive to protecting their property.
Yeah, and talking about hemp, like that's true. That's another thing that one of the reasons that probably cannabis is made illegal. But the other side of that is I like when people vilify oil. You have to keep in mind how was life before oil was being used, right? Mm-hmm. Like people were using, what were they using for fuel? Whale oil. Yep. Right? Now, how efficient and how abundant of a resource is whale oil? And is that more environmentally friendly than oil? Like, and never mind the fact that ever since we've been using oil, that has been able to it has made life so much more comfortable and convenient that it's able to support a planet of 7 billion people, right? Before that, it was 1 billion, barely 1 billion. And so people, they hate oil, it's very, fossil fuel, it's, it's dirty, it's, global warming, all this kind of crap. But then we're like, well, it's kind of, you're reaping all these benefits. Oil, what was it, like the number one most versatile commodity in the world next to silver? I think silver is like the number 2. So, So yeah, it's a rampant amount of hypocrisy and contradictions.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, when we just look at all the good that oil's done for us, I mean, are we going to have all these negative externalities? Absolutely. And those negative externalities should rightly be opposed. But at the same time, we have to look at all the positive that it's done for society. Look at how much life expectancy has gone up in the past century.
Right.
People are living longer than ever, and that life expectancy keeps going up and up and up.
Right. Yeah, and government has done nothing, absolutely nothing to promote that, right? The only thing they've done is hinder it, make it more difficult, like providing, stumbling blocks for entrepreneurs and employers that want to create value and offer it to people, and they're just like tripping them up with their tax and their regulations and their red tape to line their pockets and increase their own power. And people, for some reason, are like, you know what? We need the government to rein in these evil corporations. But it's so much feel, so much emotion. People. I don't know. It's just so sad how these politicians are so conniving and manipulative. They take advantage of people's good intentions. Like people, they want to help the poor. They want to help the sick. They want to, give foreign aid to countries that are struggling. But when you break it down, like, well, what's the incentives that are created when you do that, right? When you empower a welfare state, does that really help the poor, or does that create more people that are dependent on welfare, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that touches up well onto an article I wrote a couple months ago, actually just 1 month ago. It was titled "Why Do People Commit Crime?" And so people commit crime. When you look back on it, you have to essentially just reverse engineer it. So instead of just looking at the problem head on, saying, "Oh, these people are committing crime, they're bad people, blah blah blah. It doesn't matter what they did, how they did it." Well, let's rationalize this and empathize with their situation. And if we reverse engineer it and look at basic economic principles, we see that people face trade-offs. We see that there's always going to be an opportunity cost, which is the cost of something when the cost of something is what you give up to get it. And then also rational people will think at the margin and will act if the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. And the fourth point is that people respond to incentives. So as we see on these 4 basic economic principles and 4 basic principles of human nature and human action, whenever the government steps in, the government is never a positive force because it's always a coercive, violent institution that's always going to just be a hinder on the free market and free interactions between consenting individuals. So whenever you have this third-party outside source that's hindering the market, what is it doing? It's just reaping people's opportunities. It's squandering them. So when you do this, whenever you have a taxation and you're imposing a cost upon individuals, you're making their opportunities that much harder. So anytime you're going to give the state more power and say, oh, the state should just redistribute all this wealth to the poor. The state should have a $15 minimum wage. Well, what happens as a result? Well, we look at basic economics again. We see that Murray Rothbard said that the minimum wage, it's compulsory unemployment. Because what the minimum wage says, it doesn't guarantee any jobs. It just says it is illegal and criminal for anyone to hire anyone else below this minimum wage. So if I volunteer my labor for anything less than that, the government is saying, no, you can't work for that guy. And so then when there's no opportunities left and people have no incentive to look for a non-existent job, what are they going to do? They're still going to be self-interested. They're still going to be rational individuals looking for the marginal benefit to exceed the marginal cost. And so because of this, as a result, they're going to turn to black market activities, which as a result tend to turn violent. And as we see, Chicago is a very good example of this. They have a 91% unemployment rate among black youths. And they also have a murder rate 4 times greater than the U.S. national average.
Yeah. Wow, you touched on a lot of points there. The first thing that came to mind, you said, so the title of your article is "Why Do People Commit Crime?" Right?
Correct.
So that reminds me of something interesting when I talk about a stateless society, like, well, how would we be protected against thieves, rapists, and murderers? And one thing I like to think about is, define theft. Okay, theft is the involuntary acquisition of someone else's property. All right, taxation. IRS. Okay, good definition. All right, so define rape. That's involuntary. Sexual use of another human being. Okay, that's the prison. The most amount of rape happens in prison. All right, good. State. So define murder, killing another individual. Okay, where does the most murder happen? War. Okay, state creation. So the greatest source of all 3 of those is the state. Right?
Absolutely.
No private criminal can ever compete with the state, ever.
And you know what a lot of people don't realize is that crime is expensive.
Right.
The only reason the government gets away with it is because they have this steady flow of funds into their hands. No private, quote-unquote, private criminal would ever be able to amass that. And so in a stateless society, when you have an abundance of opportunities, there's literally no incentive to commit violent crime. When you can just get a job like that, serve someone's needs like that,
right,
Why would you go employ coercion to get what you need?
Or even the opposite. Why would somebody rob a store to get food if they know that, people are going to know them, that they're a thief, and they're going to watch out extra for them, and they're likely not going to be able to do it again? Why would
Absolutely.
why would you destroy your reputation as a human being rather than become employed and work for your living? So you're basically shooting yourself in the foot when you do that, and it just doesn't make sense. But
Once a free society is achieved, obviously nothing's going to be perfect. No individual is going to be perfect. Not everyone is going to rationally respond to incentives, and so you're still going to have your psychos that are going to commit violent crime.
Yeah, sure.
And those odd eggs are going to be unexplainable. However, once you do achieve that free society, because there is that demand for defense, and because your criminals are going to be ostracized and cut off from the rest of society, society is going to continually adapt and find better ways to quell this violence until it's as minimal as humanly possible. And that's the beautiful thing about it. So anytime the state steps in and says, you know what, we're going to be your defense. And then as a result, they're unaccountable, and you just see the crime. I mean, crime right now is at historic lows. But when you see the more that the government interferes in cities like Chicago, you see that crime is going to skyrocket once you lose those incentives.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting. Like, you can look at like voting in two ways, or the politicians in two ways. Like they are unaccountable on one hand. What can we do? We'll just vote him out of office. All right, how many years is that going to take? All right, that's kind of ridiculous. All right, so and the other thing is the politicians, they can do anything they want, and then they can give the excuse, well, they voted for it, right? They voted for me, so therefore they must have wanted this stuff. And what can the people do? What, write your congressman, beg? No, that's to me that's the equivalent of begging. And I think much more good can be done, elsewhere. Raising your kids and as a logical, empathetic, loving, compassionate people, and talking about philosophy and economics and things like that. So yeah, it's the state is I call it a self-licking ice cream cone. It creates its own demand, right? It's problem, reaction, solution, right? It's like they intervene, they create a problem, then the people clamor for a solution, they create, step in, intervene again, create another problem, and it's the endless cycle, right? So yeah, it's and the other thing I was going to say is, Larkin Rose likes to talk that there's no difference really between the mafia and the state, right? And
Absolutely.
the only difference is that people view the state as legitimate, right? So the people, like the mafia gives a command, the people don't call it law, they just call it a threat of violence or a threat of punishment, right? But when the state does the exact same thing, it's called law and it's considered acceptable and legitimate, right? So and what are the roots of that, right? That goes all the way back to authoritarian parenting and government schools, right? So those are really the roots of statism, is molding the child's brain, and that's really the awesome goal of homeschooling and unschooling, and just get your kids out of those indoctrination factories.
I think that ties in well to one of the core tenets of voluntarism and agorism, which is civil disobedience. And so I would say that even a lot of small government libertarians are very turned off to that idea. And I think they get the bad rep mainly from your ANCOMs. And so I believe that, a lot of them will say like, oh, no, don't do civil disobedience. Just vote them out. If you want to have a say, just vote for a new politician, vote for this, vote for that. But in principle, they say that they're telling you it's immoral for you to oppose the state and work within it in order to change things. But in principle, that's like saying that if the mafia comes up to me and demands my money, that I have no right to oppose them. And that if I am unhappy with this, I should join the mafia in order to change it from the inside.
Right. Join Sauron's army if you want to change the Sauron. Right? So it's kind of funny. It reminds me of Harriet Tubman, right? The Underground Railroad, which is something that we all learn about in government school. She's like, praised as a saint and everything. But imagine if the people at the time, maybe they did this, I'm not even sure, if they said, Harriet, what are you doing? You're breaking the law. Just petition your congressman, just vote to change from the inside, or become a politician. And why don't you change slavery?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I actually wrote an article called "Politics is a Waste of Time," in which I said the exact same things you did. What if Harriet Tubman wrote her congressman?
Right.
What if Gandhi ran for office? What if Jesus ran for office? How drastically different would history be if all these great and revering men just worked through the system? It wouldn't have happened. There would have been no progress.
Or Schindler, like during the Holocaust, smuggled out a bunch of Jews, saving thousands of Jews.
You didn't see him petitioning
why
Hitler.
don't you stop breaking the law, Mr. Schindler, and just vote, or just write to your congressman, write to Hitler, or why don't you campaign against Hitler, see if you can take over as dictator and change it from the inside. Yeah, I mean, we laugh, but like people really say that, right? They really think that that's going to make a difference, and to me, it's just as akin to begging. Like Lou Fiend, I don't know if you know from the Freedom Fiends, he has a Facebook page called "Campaign for a Longer Leash."
I'm actually following that right now.
Yeah. And so that's pretty much exactly what you're doing when you're begging. You're appealing, and the same thing goes with those protesters, like occupiers, Occupy Wall Street kind of guys, people that they think, I guess, that they're being all radical, but in the end, what they're doing is they're begging their congressman, please do something about these Wall Street people. They're not being nice, and like, wait a minute, where do you think the Wall Street people get their power from? Maybe did you consider maybe it was from the politicians? Why do you think they're going to do something about it, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, it's difficult to talk to people, about these topics because, so much emotion, so much, illogical rationality, if you can call it rationality, gets, it gets tangled, right? And to disentangle that, it requires not only appealing to logic, but you really also have to appeal to their emotions. Like, this one guy that we have on the Seize Liberty podcast, he was saying that there's an analogy of a man and an elephant, right? And when you talk to somebody, the man is the logic and the elephant is the emotion, right? So you can talk to the man and appeal to the logic part of the brain as much as you want, but if the elephant is going to go a different way, the person is going that way, right?
Correct.
So then that's one thing that Larkin Rose talks about a lot is you have to appeal to kind of psychology, and one thing is like just being repetitive. So if a person, even if you just say one thing to a status, which is like, government is illegitimate, and then you walk away, like maybe that's going to plant a seed, right? Because some people have the mindset of, if they hear something once, they're like, yeah, that's just once. Then they hear something again, then they're like, you know what? I heard that before. maybe that there's something to that. And so some people ascribe legitimacy or correctness to a concept just because they heard it many times, which is the exact opposite of why you should believe something. But nevertheless, people do, right?
Correct.
Do you encounter people like that?
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah. So it's difficult, but you do a good job with your articles. I think I've read that one you mentioned about what's it called? Politics is a waste of time. Actually, I think my wife sent me that article even before I discovered your YouTube channel, and she's like, check this out. So I read it. I'm like, wow, this is some awesome stuff. I like it a lot. And people ask me, they ask me, I want to make a difference in the world. I want to improve the world. What should I do? I'm like, well, stay away from politics.
Absolutely.
Because that is a big waste of your time. You want to improve the world? You be nice to your neighbor. You be charitable in your community. You go to your farmer's market. You talk to the local vendors. You raise your kids well. Maybe homeschool them, right? Maybe you start a garden. Maybe you increase your skill set. Those are very simple ways to improve your. Forget about somebody overseas in Iraq. You can't really do much about that. People are like, well, there's oppression there. They're in the Middle East, they're enslaving their women. Okay, but what are you going to do about it? There's nothing you can do, right?
Unfortunately, not.
This is the problem. So you gotta. To me, it's like it all comes down to the individual, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a quote. One of my favorite quotes from Confucius. He says, if if you want to change your country, first you change your town. You want to change your town, first you change your village. You want to change your village, first you change, your family. And you want to change your family, you change yourself.
Absolutely. You know what
it always comes back to the individual, right?
Absolutely. And I think even the individual is greater than collective, and because of that, we typically look at things like government as the most destructive forces, but rarely do we actually realize. I just wrote an article yesterday about it called "The Power of Emotional Freedom."
Mm.
Rarely do we realize that the biggest and most dangerous force in the universe is ourselves.
Mm.
The most dangerous force in the universe is feelings of aggression that overwhelm us and cloud our own thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the most powerful and important thing that you can do for creating a better world is creating a better you and rationalizing your own thoughts and emotions. I can't recommend any more of these two books, Freedom by Adam Kokesh
Nice.
and Nonviolent Communications by Marshall Rosenberg.
Nice.
These books changed my life. I know to anyone listening, they will absolutely change yours. And the key to unlocking emotional freedom is that we're all just in a constant state of suffering. We have all these negative emotions that bring us down. And so what nonviolent communications is about is trying to take that and process it all. And so when we're overwhelmed with a negative feeling, oftentimes that's hindering our own needs and desires. And so what Marshall Rosenberg writes about is try to unlock that, try to rationalize it. If you have a negative emotion overwhelming you, step back. Think to Adam Kokesh's famous line, "You are a free, beautiful, and independent human being. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." So think to that and then try to rationalize your emotions. Step back. Find the need that's being hindered. And then when you realize it's being hindered, just think to yourself, like, I've rationally deduced that this feeling is getting in the way of being productive. So then just put a smile on your face. You can live in an eternal state of happiness. And so once we're able to unlock that emotional freedom, that's the most beautiful form of freedom. Even more than having freedom from the state is being free of being a slave to your own emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember Adam. What he was saying when he was in jail, he told the one of the guards. He's like, "Hey, come here. You're a free, beautiful, and independent human being. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. All right, go back to work." I love that. That's great.
You know, and I saw him speak a couple months ago. He said he actually would tell every single prison guard that.
Really?
And he actually got them reading his book as a result.
Seriously? Oh, that's awesome.
And so I think because of that, oftentimes we like to classify people into groups. I mean, I know we're even guilty of it in this show, calling people liberals, socials, conservatives, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? You'll read it in this book, Nonviolent Communications, that words like that, those are judgmental terms. And we often don't empathize with other people and see them for what they are, as fellow human beings. And a lot of them are just trapped in this vicious cycle of damaged thinking. And so once we're able to realize that, instead of lumping people into groups as, oh, he's a statist, we're anarchists, this is our, it's very groupthink, and it's very dangerous.
True.
So even if we have a bunch of anarchists together, that still may be, if you have these negative emotions involved, it may be just as damaging as statism for all we know. So once you're able to realize that, hey, we're all human beings, even people that work for the state, they are just as much victims of this negative way of thinking as people that are actual victims of the state violence. So it all comes down to that way of thinking and realizing that even the most hardened tyrants, at the root of this case, they are damaged individuals with a damaged way of thinking.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, there is an emotional slavery there, and to me it comes back to destructive childhoods and battered. I remember Larkin Rose describes statism as a battered citizen syndrome. Like the woman, the person gets beat by the woman gets beat by the husband, and she's like, oh, but I can't live without him. He, how will I pay my rent? How will I get food? How will I get shelter? How will I get clothes? And basically people have the same approach to the state, right? They're afraid of the unknown, afraid of somebody, the all-powerful protector that guarantees protection, when in fact they never deliver and never have to deliver, or if they deliver crap or violence, they never have to be accountable to that. And
I think a good rebuttal to that argument there, where people say like, oh, no one will do this in a free society, no one will do that in a free society. Well, what if, and then you can ask them like, well, what if I want to do this? Are you going to stop me? If you support the state, you're saying that I cannot complete this task. So if I see that the state is providing poor police services, like you say, oh, we need a state to provide policing to the poor. Well, what if I want to start a police service? And what if I want to provide my service to the poor for free? You're going to stop me from doing that?
Right. Exactly. It comes down to voluntarism, voluntary interaction or coercive interaction, and and that's what And one of my friends, Dave, he frequently asks people, I don't support any form of human slavery. What form of slavery do you support? Right. So that's good. All right. So Justin, I don't want to keep you too long. So can you give the people your links and how they want to if they want to contact you or follow you?
Absolutely. They can reach out to us on Facebook and Twitter. We are at Liberty Hangout on Twitter. We are facebook.com/Liberty Hangout on Facebook. Our website is, of course, libertyhangout.org. You can find us on YouTube. Just search the title Liberty Hangout, where we got a bunch of great content. We got those parody promo videos. We got some other original content. A couple of podcasts. We'll try to work more on that. And if you check out libertyhangout.org, we got a lot of great liberty-minded material from a great array of writers. We like to dive into topics ranging from philosophy to economics to history, even to politics. It's always important to stay well-rounded, and we like to keep our readers up to date on all these great and amazing fields.
Awesome. Yeah. So anybody wants to check them out, please do. Throw them a like, maybe a donation. Do you accept donations, by the way?
Yeah, I take Bitcoin donations.
Bitcoin. All right. So throw him some unregulated love with Bitcoin. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. So if anybody wants to support me, you can. I have links below for my Bitcoin, for my PayPal, also for Patreon. Please check those out if you want to help me continue doing this, because my wife has been telling me, you got to make money. You got to make money with this stuff. It's a waste of time. You're not doing anything for the family. So I'm like, all right. So I'm trying to make some income. It's not easy doing this stuff. It takes time. Setting up these interviews and finding all these beautiful people. So I love doing it. I want to keep doing it. So please help us out. It's a labor of love. And I love doing it. So awesome. Thanks a lot, Justin, for the conversation. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.